This photo represents my father as I thought of him as a young kid. Sometime after my parents had divorced and my mother and I left Florida to live with my grandparents in Washington, D.C., he quit his newspaper job and moved to Egypt to try his luck as a stringer or freelance journalist. My memory of this picture was of a dashing and carefree father on a camel, but now that I have dug it out, I see that he has a somewhat concerned look on his face, which makes sense because camels are strong-willed and unpredictable. I knew him in this period mostly through letters that he sent my mom to read to me, photographs, and cassette tapes that he made to talk to me directly. Once, when I was 5, he saw a movie involving a father-daughter relationship which made him sentimental, and he called me on a Saturday morning from Cairo. In those days, international phone calls from Egypt were placed by calling an operator, waiting long periods of time until a connection was available, and then talking on a line that sounded like a scratchy record. As the story goes, he waited hours to get a phone connection. When he finally got me on the line in Washington, I said, "Hi, Daddy, I'm watching cartoons right now. Could you call back later?" And I hung up. He brought my mother and I to visit him in Egypt once when I was 6. We were treated with kindness and hospitality everywhere we went, and I remember thinking that the rest of the world was much friendlier and more interesting than my homeland. I was still blonde, and in Egypt, strangers would walk up to me and stroke my hair. The country was magical to me with its new sights and smells and sounds, its art, animals, history, and language I couldn't understand. I still think that the Muslim call to prayers, which would echo across the city from mosques 5 times a day, is one of the most hauntingly beautiful sounds in the world. My father taught me to count to 10 in Arabic. We visited the pyramids, and I rode on a lazy mule being guided by an old man riding on another mule. I watched my parents gallop over the desert on horses in deep resentment at the whole fact of being a child. While we were visiting the Nile resort town of Luxor, bread riots broke out in Cairo, and my father was convinced he was missing the biggest story of his career. The country had been put under curfew, so he hired a car to drive us, under cover of darkness and with the headlights turned off, back into Cairo. I wondered how the driver's language and customs, different than mine, also made him able to see in the dark. In my early teens, I started flying to the Middle East by myself about once a year to visit. These trips generally followed the same pattern set when I was 6. Promise of a fascinating vacation, interrupted by mild but completely unnecessary danger, brought on by my father's inability to actually take a vacation. I had been in Cairo for about 24 hours at age 15 when he woke me up in the middle of the night to tell me that he was leaving immediately to fly to the United Arab Emirates to cover last-minute peace talks. He instructed me not to leave the apartment, and it wasn't until I heard the click of the door behind him that I actually absorbed that he meant it. A few days later, my stepmother flew in from where she was living in Palestine. We went to a camel market and saw a baby camel born moments earlier, bright pink and taking its first tentative steps on impossibly long and wobbly legs. At that moment, the camel became my spirit animal, whatever that means. The next year, he was living in Israel, and we set out for a tour of the Holy Land sites in the Palestinian territories. But it was the middle of one of the intifadas, or uprisings, and my dad kept getting distracted, like a dog who sees a squirrel, by burning tires and skirmishes between Israeli soldiers and Palestinian youth. He would tell me to lay down on the floor of the car and drive right into the fray, waving a Palestinian headscarf and speaking in Arabic to the townspeople so they would let us get even closer. Then he would grab his notebook and a pen and run off, instructing me to stay down. It was never clear to me how anyone could vacation in a place so tense, so small and densely tense. At the end of one trip to Israel, he sent me to the airport alone in a taxi, which the security there found so strange, they strip searched me. I started to become more resistant to the trips, so he upped the ante. Dad offered to pay for a 2-day layover in Paris by myself. I danced around my house in Baltimore, repeating in my high school French, "Voulez-vous aller avec moi au lit?" Or "Would you go to bed with me?" Which may not be a thing you even say in French. My mother smiled indulgently, unaware that I was actually going to be unaccompanied on that leg of the trip. The genuine highlight of Paris was a dinner my father had arranged at an outdoor bistro with a glamorous female reporter, whom I decided to become in adulthood, blissfully missing the mark of reality completely. When I got to Egypt, we went on a 3-day camel trip with Bedouins in the Sinai Desert, through sandstone canyons, sleeping under a sky so starlit and wide it seemed to blanket us. Setting out on that adventure, my father gave me some sort of preventative medicine that made me vomit half an hour later. The camel I was on got loose and irritated and galloped off as I clung to it, people yelling all around. With these mishaps behind me and amidst such beauty, I relaxed. Dad still faithfully pulled out his shortwave radio 3 times a day to listen to the BBC World News headlines, and I vaguely wondered if something were to go down, whether he might hijack a camel and lead me there to be married off to a Bedouin tour guide. I was conceived in 1970, while the U.S. Senate was holding high-profile hearings regarding the safety of the pill, and my mother decided to stop taking contraceptives and use the rhythm method. My parents barely missed a beat on their way to bigger things. I can see now that in spite of being a footnote in contraceptive history, I was very lucky. I got a wandering father I saw once in a while instead of a man who stayed home and did whatever fathers do. But he gave me Egypt and camels and irrational curiosity.
Connie, thank you so much. And let me just join you. I have to say, your first impression of your dad is the one that I take, dashing and debonair. He looks so cool.
He did. He was
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. That's a nice thing about young traveling dads, that you can imagine a lot of great things they're doing out there.
Yeah. Were you on the trip that that photo was taken on?
No.
No, you weren't on that one. Yeah, that's amazing. But what an exciting life he had, or at least it seems to be, in the
Yes.
Middle East. I mean, you
Well,
never
I think
run it.
covering the Middle East is exciting until it's not.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly always interesting and pretty much never ending. He's not going to run out of work
No.
over there. Is your dad still alive?
Yes, he is now in the States.